Welcome to this British Psychological Society audio interview. I'm Wendy Barnaby, and with me is Professor Tim Dalgleish from the Medical Research Council's Cognition and Brain Sciences Unit in Cambridge. And Tim is also the director of the Cambridge Centre for Affective Disorders, based at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge. And Tim, you are a winner of the Society's President's Award for Distinguished Contributions to Psychological Knowledge. So many congratulations.
Thank you very much.
We want to talk about your research in the area of clinical depression and memory. You're interested in the way memory works in clinically depressed people. Why is memory so important?
Yes, so for everybody, not just people with depression, the way we understand ourselves and our lives and our past is really just a way we understand our memories. The only reality we have is the snapshot of the present moment. Everything else is either an imagination about the future or a memory of the past. So to that extent, if our memories aren't accurate or they're distorted or biased in some way, that's really going to influence every aspect of the way we think, the way we feel, the way we navigate our way through our daily lives. And what we find in people with depression is that those biases or distortions do exist.
So tell me what goes wrong in people who are depressed.
What we find with people with depression is they almost look at the past through the opposite of rose-tinted glasses, through, deadly nightshade-tinted glasses, for example. And so where there's any ambiguity, they will remember things in a negative way. And this might be because at the time those events occurred, they encoded or laid down the memories in a negative way. It might not just be that they're looking back in a particularly biased way. They may have actually interpreted and understood the events at the time in that way. But whichever of those it is, it means that their construction of their lives is very negatively skewed. And this, of course, pervades and becomes toxic for all aspects of the way they think about themselves and their current state.
Might they have interpreted what was going on around them in a negative way in the past so that they recall it in a negative way, even though they weren't depressed when they encoded it?
That's a really good question. So the evidence suggests that when people with a vulnerability to depression, who aren't currently feeling particularly down or depressed, go through their day-to-day life, they aren't particularly negatively biased in the way they encode their memories, which makes us think that it's, to some extent, a way of looking back at the past that's the problem in depression. There's almost like a set of memories in filing cabinets in the mind, and they only are able to open the ones with negative marked on the front.
How else does the memory malfunction?
So there's a second problem, which is about the detail or specifics of the memories they're able to come up with. So if I was to ask people who've never been depressed to come up with a particular memory of a past event, and I could give them a reminder, I'd say, remember a party, something to do with a party. Most people would say, oh yeah, I remember my 21st birthday party or a party I went to last week and this happened. People with depression find that relatively more difficult, and they come up with very general responses. So they might say something like, I've never liked parties, or all the parties I went to as a teenager I felt lonely, or something much more general. And what we know is the ability to generate specific memories is very important for mental health. It helps us solve problems, it helps us plan specific things in the future. And so people with depression who find this relatively difficult are also struggling in that domain as well.
And presumably we need to recall positive and negative specific memories.
That's right. We need to know the specifics about negative things that have gone wrong in the past, because how we dealt with those gives us a blueprint, if you like, for dealing with similar things in the future. We need to know about positive specific things in the past, partly because it informs how we plan and conceptualize our future lives, but also because it's helpful for mood regulation. And, it's just nice to think about positive memories. So difficulty in coming up with specifics from the past has all sorts of pervasive implications.
And what are the other specific problems of memory in people with depression?
So I've talked about a negative bias in memory and a difficulty in being specific, but there's also just general cognitive problems with memory. So we rely on being able to remember things in the day-to-day, but people with depression find all sorts of aspects of cognitive life, memory, attention, planning, reasoning, problem-solving, to be much harder. They just haven't quite got the cognitive capacity of people who aren't feeling depressed, because depression just basically creates a bit of a fog in their mind. They can't remember what they're supposed to be doing, they can't remember phone numbers, they can't remember enough to make plans and so on. So there's also these very generic memory problems across the board, as well as those specific ones I talked about.
So how can you use that knowledge to help people who are depressed?
What I think is useful is to give an example of an intervention that flows very naturally from those problems. So I've already said that people with depression have difficulty in coming up with specific personal memories from the past. But what we know is that if people practice doing this, they can get much better at it. And so an easy intervention to do is to just ask people with depression to systematically practice coming up with specific memories from the past and see if doing nothing else but that will help their depressed symptoms go away. And what we find is that their symptoms of depression go away, and it's directly in proportion to how much better they've become at generating the specific memories. So it's early days with these trials. We've done a couple of trials now, and we're in the middle of a much bigger trial, but it's very encouraging.
Does the effect last?
The current trial we're looking at is following people up for 6 months, and the previous trials only followed them up for a couple of months, but it certainly lasted over a 2-month period. Another thing we're doing with the specific memories is thinking that it's very useful in terms of how people regulate their mood to be able to access specific positive memories from the past. And we've come up with a memory technique to help people with depression to do that. So this is called the method of loci. It's a very ancient technique, goes back to ancient Greek times. And really it's a technique used by all the world memory champions, people who can remember pi to 1 million places or can memorise 20 packs of cards in order very quickly. And it requires you to come up with a very familiar route, such as the way you might walk around your house or your route to work. And for each point along that route, you use that as a locus or a place to lodge something that you're trying to remember. So say it was your route to work and you had 10 places on your route to work, the end of your road, the post office on the corner, Mrs. Jones's house round the corner and so on. Within each place, you would place one of the things you had to remember. So if you had a 10-item shopping list, you'd put each item in one of the places along that route. And the way you do this, which is critical, is you come up with a bizarre and interesting image that links the two together. So if the first place was the post box at the end of your road and you had to remember to buy a pint of milk, you would imagine the post box full of milk such that milk was gushing out of the post box and covering the road completely. It's a very bizarre image. When you get to the shops, you just recreate the route in your mind and you immediately see the post box with milk gushing out. It's virtually impossible not to remember it like that. And you think, oh yes, milk. And you just go through each locus like that. And that's how people who remember pi or decks of cards do it. So what we did is adapt it to positive memories. We got people to come up with a list of the kind of memories they want to be remembering when they're feeling really down or they can feel their mood shifting, which would help them regulate their mood. And we got them to come up with an image to locate that memory to a location on their route. And then we asked them 6 months later, just with a surprise phone call, could you remember any of the memories that you put down? And they could pretty much remember all of the memories even 6 months later, whereas people in another condition where we just said rehearse the memories in a rote rehearsal way could remember very few of their memories. And critically, we also asked them to keep a diary and say how often did you use this in the day-to-day to regulate your mood and how successful was it in regulating your mood. And there's much stronger evidence in the people with the method of loci technique that they could use this regularly in the day-to-day to improve and regulate their mood. And this is really critical because people who are vulnerable to depression, there's always a tipping point where their mood starts to go down, and if they can catch it early, it stops them spiralling down into a new depressed episode. And so it's really just to nip in the bud that tendency to get very catastrophic about things. So it's a very useful technique.
And it must be much better than taking medicine for depression.
That's right. We're not advocating it as an alternative. It's really just a tool which can be added into existing therapies that people have.
So, in a nutshell, how would you describe your research?
I think a neglected component of depression is the difficulties that depressed people have with the way they remember their personal past. It's skewed in a negative direction and it's very overgeneral. It used to be thought that these were just by-the-way things that were associated with depression, but we now know that they're very much causal in driving and maintaining the problems. What this means is that if we can find a way of reversing those problems, we can reverse some of the symptoms of depression. So it's a very fruitful avenue for developing novel components of interventions to supplement the treatments we